Now, I wasn't even going to talk about this until Labour announced the BritCard. And suddenly, this bizarre little story from Manchester became the perfect example of something much bigger. A glimpse of what happens when government and tech team up and decide that close enough is good enough. Now, before we talk about Steve, please do have a think about liking and subscribing. So, Steve Jones is a 53-year-old teacher from Teddington, Greater London. He doesn't smoke. He's only been to Manchester a handful of times. And on the 14th of December 2024, when someone allegedly dropped a cigarette butt outside H&M on Market Street, Steve was 200 miles away arranging his father-in-law's funeral. But according to Manchester City Council, he was guilty of littering, of breaking the law, of being in a city he wasn't even in, and worst of all, having hat hair. Yes, hat hair. That was part of the official description.
Hair is everything.
Steve is bald.
I can't help but feel partially responsible.
This would be funny if it wasn't a real man's life, but that's the thing, it is. Manchester City Council issued a single justice procedure notice, convicting Steve without a trial and sent him a collection order in the post. He received a £433 fine and a notice of conviction. Why? Because the person who did commit the offence gave Steve's birthday, wrong year, a random address in Cumbria, and bizarrely that was just enough data points for the system to say, close enough, charge him. Steve spent weeks emailing back and forth, chasing the footage, trying to clear his name. Now, the council did eventually apologise, but even after that, he received another letter, confirming he had still been convicted in his absence. Because once the system starts moving, it doesn't exactly stop for the truth. Because why bother with facts when you've got admin to process and targets to hit? Now, interestingly, Greater Manchester Police confirmed last week that they're now using AI to process thousands of public forms and crime records. According to a new report, over 9,000 submissions were handled in just 3 months by AI automation. That's 10 minutes of human oversight per form wiped. Entire workflows now depend on software that processes based on inputs, not context. And look, I get it. AI can free up time, it can make things faster, but it can also make mistakes, which, once made, are embedded at speed. And if you're wrongly accused like Steve, the machine won't stop to ask questions. And now that same system that couldn't check details properly wants to decide your right to work, rent, travel, and exist. Digital ID is being pitched as precision tech by people who still think that Steve is a smoker with a wig. So forgive me for not being reassured. Because if Steve could be convicted over a cigarette he didn't drop, what do we think happens when that system gets upgraded, sped up, and handed biometric access to your entire life? Because under new plans from Keir Starmer, digital ID is now being proposed not just for migrants but for everyone. Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary, told Sky News, the plan is to ensure that everybody has it, but you can choose whether you use it. Sorry, what? If we can choose whether we use it, why will it be mandatory? But honestly, out of everything, what I find most bizarre is the timing. We're in a cost of living crisis. We've got schools with crumbling concrete, a housing shortage, knife crime, flood risks, rail strikes, soaring sex crimes, numerous ongoing inquiries that are never ending and never solving anything. We need more non-PC policing. But this is what we're funding? Now, the argument from Starmer is that it'll stop illegal migration. He said, you will not be able to work in the UK if you do not have a digital ID. It's as simple as that. Okay, but illegal migration is already illegal. If we believe Starmer's whole smashing the gangs thing, then we also have to admit that they don't come here and suddenly denounce gang life and become law-abiding. They arrive with networks, contacts, cultural infrastructure. They've got their own system in place. If breaking the law was a deterrent for not getting work, it wouldn't be happening. A criminal doesn't go, ugh, damn it, I was going to break the law, but now there's an app for that. Now, I'm sure there's going to be people who will say, well, if we had digital ID, Steve's story wouldn't have happened. But that's the thing. Steve's story happened because of a system like that. It was a flawed algorithm that matched a few wrong data points and said, close enough, that's our guy. And that's exactly the kind of logic that a national digital ID system would run on. It didn't catch the culprit, and it just caught the easiest target, and it just refused to let go. And besides, if this really is about digital security, in a country that's seeing rising cyber attacks, data leaks, and NHS meltdowns every other month, why are we consolidating every detail of our lives into an app? This wasn't in any manifesto, and it hasn't been publicly voted on. And yet here we are, digitizing citizenship, centralizing data, and doing it all with a smile and a press conference. Now, of course, someone's going to pop up in the comments and say, well, Emma, the EU has ID cards and nobody's panicking over there. Sure, the EU has ID cards, but they're national, they're not centralized. They're not a single UK-wide database tied to biometrics and real-time AI cross-checking. And if they worked so well, Europe wouldn't be in a migration crisis either. Unless, of course, they've quietly decided that Britain's the final destination and giving everyone a free Eurostar ticket out the back door and helping boats get in the water, which, look, I'm not saying that's happening. But if it were, digital ID still wouldn't stop it. Now, I just can't, for the life of me, figure out who wants this. It's not a traditional Labour policy. In fact, ID cards are one of the reasons that people turned on Blair. And it's not particularly conservative either. The whole small government thing doesn't exactly gel with a centralised biometric tracking database. And I really doubt that liberal individuals are begging for more surveillance in their day-to-day lives. Now, the Lib Dems, curiously, who famously blocked Labour's ID card rollout back in 2010, now seem to be reconsidering their stance. So Ed Davey has mentioned Estonia as a model. Estonia has a population smaller than West Yorkshire, so I'm not sure it's the model that we think it is. So who is this for? Because I honestly believe that this is so unpopular across every demographic that maybe this is the real national unifier. It's BritCard that's finally getting us all on the same page. And I really can't understand why any government would want this as their legacy. It's not patriotic, progressive, pro-privacy or pro-choice. And it certainly isn't positive PR.
I don't know her.
Because this isn't governance, it's overreach. It's about looking like you're solving something without actually doing the hard, messy, political work of governing. And look, maybe you trust the government. Maybe you think this will never ever be misused. But I will say, if we ever genuinely do get an authoritarian government, left or right, the absolute last thing you want is a real-time national database of every citizen's life since their 18th birthday. Steve Jones deserved better, and this country definitely deserves better. And if we want to rebuild trust, identity, national strength, then that starts with accountability, not automation. Steve's story isn't an outlier, it's a preview. And the more power we hand to automated systems, the more ordinary people will be buried under the weight of false data and empty apologies. Digital ID is being sold as a solution. The government is saying that this is for your safety. But all it really does is just make you scannable. It's bureaucracy dressed up as boldness. A false promise of protection funded by people who weren't consulted. And when something this big is being introduced, we should ask questions without fear of being labelled a conspiracy theorist. Because in a country that's already struggling to trust its institutions, the last thing we need is a digital leash. But look, maybe I'm being cynical. Maybe I'm being overly cautious. Let me know what you think about this below. Do you support this? Please tell me why. And please do also think about giving this a like and a subscribe. Thank you so much.